Alright, so let's break down exactly what the differences are between the new iPhone 14, the non-Pro model, and the outgoing iPhone 13 Pro. And the reason why I'm comparing these two phones is because spec for spec, they're very similar, and with the used market now, you can pretty much buy the 13 Pro for around the same price, if not cheaper than the new iPhone 14. So it's been a year since this phone's been out, and if you're planning on upgrading to the new 14 series, you may want to look into this phone instead for a few different reasons, and I'll tell you why in just a little bit. So inside the 13 Pro is Apple's A15 Bionic processor. It's a super fast processor even if it's a year old now, but playing games, editing TikToks or Instagram Reels or photo editing on Lightroom, this phone is going to be a piece of cake for those tasks. It also has 6 gigs of RAM, up to 1 terabyte of storage, and it also features ProMotion 120Hz for a super fast and super smooth experience. So the thing about the Pro Series phones is that you have 3 different focal lengths for the back cameras. You get an ultra-wide, a main wide camera, and a 3x telephoto zoom lens, and the camera system on this phone is super solid. Now, taking a look at the 14 though, it's very similar, very similar to the 13 Pro. It features the same processor, it has 6 gigs of RAM, just like the 13 Pro, although this can only go up to 512 gigs of storage. Now, this also features the main wide and ultra wide cameras, so what you're missing out on here on the new iPhone 14 is that 3x telephoto zoom lens and ProMotion 120Hz, which I believe is a game changer for iPhones. Now, as someone who switches phones almost every week reviewing the latest phones, I can tell the difference between a standard 60Hz display to a 90Hz to 120Hz. Now, if you've never used a high refresh rate display before, then you might not notice it at first, but the more you use it, the more you'll appreciate having a buttery smooth experience throughout iOS. Now, when it comes to the overall design, the iPhone 14 doesn't look all that different from last year's non-Pro model. Now, the camera lens might be a little bit bigger, but in terms of its overall size and weight, this isn't new. We'll have to wait a few weeks to check out the 14 Plus, but the regular iPhone 14 looks the same with a new paint job, and the sides are still aluminum, which feels great. It's a matte finish, so it doesn't get fingerprinty like the Pro model, but the back glass is glossy, so depending on what color you choose, you will see smudges pretty easily. But this blue color for the 14 looks incredible. It's easily the best iPhone color that came out this year. Now, the 13 Pro, on the other hand, you've seen this before, similar to the 14, but the sides are stainless steel versus aluminum, which is a lot stronger than the aluminum frame from the 14 series, but it is glossy, so fingerprint, especially on this graphite 13 Pro, looks smudgy all the time. The phone's also noticeably heavier than the regular 14, despite it being the same size. And what's also different is that the back glass on the Pro series is frosted versus glossy, which hides fingerprints a lot easier. Now, if you're the type of person who gets a brand new phone and puts a case on it immediately, then these tiny details won't really matter to you. But if you are looking for a case, then you should check out channel sponsor Rhino Shield. They just sent out their new MagSafe cases for the iPhone 14 series, and these cases are just so nice. Now, I'm usually not a case person, but the fact that I'm going to have to travel quite a bit these next few months, I needed to protect these phones from any unwanted dings or scratches, or even worse, a cracked phone while I'm out of town and I won't have phones to film with. So Rhino Shield sent over these MagSafe cases so that the new iPhone 14 series is well protected while I'm traveling, and I can still use MagSafe to charge my phone or use my MagSafe wallet when I'm out and about. Now, their MagSafe cases also boast 2 times the magnet strength of the first-party Apple cases, which is awesome. They have the Solid Suit, the Mod NX, and Clear cases available, and their cases are super customizable, and they also feature hundreds of designs that you can choose from, tons of color choices, and what's even cooler is that they make these grips, which are also MagSafe capable, so that I can just comfortably use the phone one-handed, or use it to prop up the phone vertically or horizontally. Now, if you guys want to check out Rhino Shield and their new MagSafe cases for the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro, use my link in the description or use the code Linsangan14 to get 20% off in the first week. Again, huge shout out to Rhino Shield for sponsoring a portion of this video. Okay, now let's talk a little bit more about the displays here. While 60Hz and 120Hz may not matter to everyday consumers, you might be more interested in its capabilities. Now, one big advantage of the 13 Pro over the 14, besides the ProMotion 120Hz refresh rate, is the peak brightness. So on the iPhone 13 Pro, you can actually get up to 1000 nits of max brightness without HDR content. So if you're outside on a sunny day, using the phone won't be too much of a problem. It's not going to be as bright as the new 14 Pro with 2000 nits of peak brightness outdoors, but the regular iPhone 14 can only get up to 800 nits, which is still bright, but when you're in direct sunlight, it's not going to be, as bright as the 13 Pro. But besides that though, the color accuracy, the display size, resolution, it's all the same. So in terms of displays, the 13 Pro, even if it's a year old now, it's still a better device. Now, performance between these two phones are identical. So in terms of, overall performance, it's a tie and you really won't notice the difference here. Like I said in the beginning, you can use this phone to game on for hours. You can edit your TikToks or Instagram reels with CapCut or LumaFusion and you'll have no problems. You can even edit your photos in Lightroom and it will handle all those tasks just fine. And to touch on battery life real quick, my year-old 13 Pro also has 94% battery health, which has gotten worse over the last few months. But the few days that I was using the two phones back to back, the 14 would actually only outperform the 13 Pro by about an hour, which isn't that big of a difference. And I'm sure that if I get the battery swapped out from Apple and get this back up to 100%, then I'm pretty sure that the 13 Pro will be on par with the iPhone 14. So one of the main things you probably want to know between the new iPhone 14 and last year's 13 Pro is if the cameras are exactly the same or are the processing on this year's iPhone better than last year's. So with both phones having the same main sensor with sensor shift OIS and the same ultra-wide camera, photos should look the same. In short, yes, they can look identical with similar sharpness and clarity in almost every lighting condition, which isn't a terrible thing to be honest, but the highlights and the shadow retentions on both iPhones look to be about the same, and the same goes for contrast in each photo I shot. I know that the iPhone 14 series is supposed to process photos better with their new photonic engine, which should give the iPhone 14 an advantage to give you a much brighter, more lifelike colors even in low light, but since these phones have the same main wide sensor, you almost likely won't be able to tell the difference between the two. Now, if we're talking about the ultra-wide though, the iPhone 13 Pro actually features a better lens here. It has a lower aperture of f1.8, which allows more light into the lens versus the f2.4 on the new iPhone 14. So in low light with the ultra-wide lens on the 13 Pro, it actually looks better with less noise or grainy photos since it's able to use a lower ISO and a higher shutter speed because of that f1.8 aperture. Another advantage of the iPhone 13 Pro is that you obviously have that 3x zoom lens, but you also have macro mode and night mode portraits, which comes in handy so that you have a more versatile way to take photos. Now, when it comes to videos, here's where the iPhone 14 actually starts to take over. While the 13 Pro has the ability to shoot, ProRes for a much higher quality video, it's capped at 1080p if you have a 128 gig iPhone 13 Pro. But if you have a 256 gigs or higher 13 Pro, then you can shoot it at 4K. But it will eat up your storage by a lot. Now the 13 Pro can also shoot cinematic mode, but it is capped at 1080p 30. Now the iPhone 14 can't shoot ProRes, but that's okay if you're not a mobile filmmaker or serious at, using your iPhone as your main camera to film videos. You don't really need to shoot ProRes or should care about it. But the cinematic mode on the iPhone 14, you can shoot in 4K 24 frames per second or 4K 30, which is so nice, which means it's sharper and looks better if you're watching these videos on a TV or a computer, for example. But besides 4K cinematic mode, you also get the iPhone 14 series exclusive action mode, which gives you a super stable gimbal-like video at 2.8K resolution, and the results are pretty solid if you have ample lighting. Also, other things that the iPhone 14 is better at is that the front-facing camera actually looks better with an f1.9 aperture versus the f2.2 aperture from last year, and it now has autofocus, which is so nice to have, which means you have this sort of real separation between you and your background without portrait mode. So depending on what you favor, photography or video, if you're more of a photographer and you take more pictures, then the iPhone 13 Pro is obviously the way to go here. It's more versatile, but if you shoot more videos and care more about cinematic mode and want super steady action shots, then the iPhone 14 is a much better device for that. And so to wrap this all up for you guys to make sure that your buying decision is a lot easier, let's go with this. The iPhone 13 Pro is still clearly the better device here, even though it's a year older now. From the brighter and smoother display down to the more versatile camera system, I just don't think the iPhone 14 is worth it, even though it has 4K cinematic mode or a better front-facing camera. Those features, in my opinion, are just really small things that don't really matter in the long run. With the iPhone 13 Pro, you have 120Hz, 1000 nits of max brightness, a triple camera system, and you can probably find the 13 Pro used or refurbished for about the same price as a brand new iPhone 14. Now, obviously, if you have an insane trade-in deal through, your carrier or Apple and you're getting the iPhone 14 at a heavy discount, then by all means, go with the 14. The 14 is still very capable and is still very much a good phone. But if you're looking for the best bang for the buck iPhone, the iPhone 13 Pro, in my opinion, is the one to get and the one you should upgrade to. Anyways, that's been it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and yeah, stay tuned for the next video.
I can't go